Domination to resurgence, India and China's journey over the centuries. This year, 50%, that is exactly half of global economic growth, will arise from India and China. ऐसा 6 अप्रैल 2023 की अपनी एक स्पीच में इंटरनेशनल मॉनेटरी फंड यानी IMF की MD क्रिस्टलिना जॉर्जीवा ने कहा था. This means India and China will together add half of every new unit of global GDP addition this year. Talk about world domination, right? पर मैंने सोचा कि हम यानी इंडिया एंड चाइना इतना पावरफुल बने कैसे? Especially given the fact that both these countries used to be very rich before they were impoverished by the British rule. This is a story of life coming a full circle for both these resurgent nations. So, fasten your seatbelts, for we are taking you on a journey spanning centuries. और like, share और subscribe करना मत भूलिएगा. हमारी स्टोरी की शुरुआत होती है 1600s में. At one end of the world, Europe is just emerging from its dark ages, having limited resources and battling cold weather. Their sole focus currently is to survive. And they also occasionally hear factual and often mythical stories of exotic faraway lands in the east where unlimited riches abound. But around the same time, something is changing massively in Europe, the Renaissance, also known as the New Age, and the Industrial Revolution has just started. So they begin to explore, leading to this period being called the Age of Great Discoveries. The Europeans start by establishing trade routes with India and China. जब यूरोपियंस इंडिया और चाइना पहुंचते हैं, they are astonished कि ये कंट्रीज कितनी प्रॉस्परस है. इनकी जमीन इतनी फर्टाइल है और यहाँ पे सब उगता है. And for your information, क्या आप जानते हैं, according to estimates, China and India each accounted for 25% of world's GDP during the 1600s. Back to our journey. After all the territorial and maritime exploring, guess what the Europeans take a fancy to? Spices. Or all of us desi folks favorite masala. सोचिए, अगर आपके पास एक खजाना आ जाए, तो आप सबसे पहले लग्जरीज में इंडल्ज करना चाहेंगे, है ना? Now go back 500 years and imagine कि अचानक मिले इतने पैसे का आप क्या करेंगे? Logically, रोटी, कपड़ा और मकान, right? But as per the BBC article, spices became another way to define what is meant to be wealthy and powerful. So now, two things are happening. One, European countries are building a large fleet of ships to support this lucrative spice trade, and leading the race are Portuguese, the Dutch, followed by Britain and France. Simultaneously, the Industrial Revolution is already underway. These Europeans are gaining access to the technology that the rest of the world hasn't seen yet. Think large, powerful ships, guns, cannons, etc. And back home, उसी समय हमारे यहाँ के राजा महाराजा ऐश की जिंदगी जीने में बिजी है. Well, some of them at least. So, these newly rich European traders, backed by their country's empire, start thinking, क्यों ना इन कंट्रीज को ही टेक ओवर किया जाए. We know how the rest of the story pans out. India, with all its hundreds of kingdoms, is taken over by a mere trading company. चाइना के साथ तो शायद और भी बुरा हुआ. The Britishers used to export opium from Calcutta to China around the mid-1800s. When the Chinese emperor objected to it, the Britishers pummeled the country in what is now called the Opium Wars, ending the legendary 800-year-old Qing dynasty. And now we come to the 1900s. The British have emerged as a world superpower, having colonies in every continent of the world. They look invincible. पर जैसा कि हम जानते हैं ना, when you are at the top, there is only one way to go, down, right? अगर closely देखा जाए, तो cracks are developing in Britain's colonialism model. More than 100 years ago, its American colonies had rebelled and declared their independence. The United States was emerging as a dominant power in its own right. By the way, उम्मीद करता हूँ आपको ये वीडियो पसंद आ रहा है. अगर आप चाहते हैं कि हम ऐसे ही वीडियोस बनाएं on the rise of the US, let us know in the comments. But at least 5 comments तो बनते हैं boss. Here, back to the story, to the 1900s. The British are busy fighting their European rivals. इंडिया को इन्होंने पूरी तरह से ट्रेन कर दिया है. मतलब अब यहाँ राज करने में फायदा कम और सरदर्द ज्यादा है. On the other hand, the Chinese are still licking their wounds from the century of humiliation following the Opium Wars, जिसके बाद Britishers ने उनके साथ काफी unfair trade agreements sign किए. And then come the two world wars. And at the end of it, The European powers are decimated, and only the USA and the Soviet Russia are left standing. We are now in 1950, so let's take stock of the situation. इंडिया को इंडिपेंडेंस तो मिल गई है, बट अब देश में काफी गरीबी है. चाइना अपने इंटरनल स्ट्रगल्स में फंसा हुआ है एंड इट विल कंटिन्यू टू स्ट्रगल फॉर द नेक्स्ट 30 इयर्स. दोनों कंट्रीज के लिए सबसे बड़ा बर्डन है उनकी पॉपुलेशन, एंड फॉर द नेक्स्ट 30-40 इयर्स दे आर गोइंग टू ओनली ट्राई टू फिगर आउट व्हाट टू डू अबाउट इट. इनफैक्ट अब उनका ग्लोबल जीडीपी में शेयर 2% रह गया है, जो 1600s में 50% था. India and China try their hands at socialism and communism respectively. It's logical, right? अगर आपकी population इतनी गरीब हो, तो it makes sense that the government will want to redistribute income from its rich to the poor. Not to mention, communism seems to be working like a charm for one of the great superpowers at the time, USSR, something that later proved to be a mirage. Anyway, China seems to have realized a bit sooner than India that capitalism is the way to go. So in 1979, it starts opening up very cautiously, not even mentioning the word capitalism anywhere. It will be another 13 years before India starts to liberalize its economy in 1991. अब आते हैं 21st century में, there are two things happening. One, technology is growing rapidly, and two, the world is getting more and more integrated in terms of free trade as well as improved communication led by the internet. The era of globalization has dawned. चाइना अब उसके मैसिव पॉपुलेशन को अब स्किल करके एग्रीकल्चर से मैन्युफैक्चरिंग की तरफ पुश कर रहा है. फ्री ट्रेड को इंसेंटिवाइज करके और अपने कोस्ट पे मैन्युफैक्चरिंग हब्स बना के चाइना अपने ह्यूज स्किल्ड पॉपुलेशन का सपोर्ट ले रहा है. बाय ऑफरिंग वेरी लो मैन्युफैक्चरिंग कॉस्ट, चाइना वेस्टर्न कंट्रीज के लिए ड्रीम मैन्युफैक्चरिंग डेस्टिनेशन बन रहा है. And as for India, it is struggling with manufacturing. But it has another advantage, a vast population that is rapidly getting good education and learning English language, thanks to the plethora of schools inherited from the British rule. And so, we start growing our services segment. The service boom starts with the IT and ITES sectors. The country is producing tens of thousands of software engineers every month. दुनिया भर की कंपनीज ने अपने IT operations को इंडिया को आउटसोर्स कर दिया है. Youngsters are taking up jobs in call centers. Early 21st century में चाइना ने दो रीजंस की वजह से इंडिया पे काफी बड़ी लीड ले ली. It opened up early and opened up quick, and its manufacturing boom meant that massive amount of capital flowed into the country. But while the Chinese dragon was soaring, the Indian tiger wasn't far behind. As India continues to press other levels of growth, such as manufacturing, its growth rate starts catching up with China. 2014 में इंडिया अपने ग्रोथ रेट को चाइना से मैच कर देता है और उसके बाद कई बार उसे ओवरटेक भी करता है. चाइना अब $14.7 ट्रिलियन इकोनॉमी है और इंडिया की $3 ट्रिलियन इकोनॉमी से कई गुना बड़ी है. बट गोइंग फॉरवर्ड, इंडिया सीम्स टू बी बेटर पॉइज्ड इन चाइना, एट लीस्ट व्हेन इट कम्स टू ग्रोथ. दिस इज ड्यू टू two reasons. India's demographic dividend, that is its young population, and China's one-child policy that is causing its population to age rapidly. In fact, कंसल्टिंग फर्म PwC का मानना है कि इंडिया और चाइना 2050 तक यूएसए को भी ओवरटेक कर लेंगे. उनके प्रोजेक्शंस के हिसाब से इंडिया एंड चाइना विल मेक अप 35% ऑफ द वर्ल्ड जीडीपी इन 2050. है ना कमाल की बात? India and China's journey from global GDP contribution of 50% to 2% and in the future to 35%. And while there are no projections beyond 2050, it is reasonable to assume that both countries may again make up 50% of the world economy sometime later in the century, making the 21st century truly belong to India and China. आज के सुपर इंफॉर्मेटिव वीडियो के लिए बस इतना ही. आई होप ये हिस्टोरिक कमबैक की कहानी आपको अच्छी लगी. ऐसे ही फैसिनेटिंग इवेंट्स के बारे में जानने के लिए हमारे साथ बने रहिए इसी चैनल पर. और भूलना नहीं, अगर वीडियो पसंद आया तो जरूर लाइक, शेयर और सब्सक्राइब करें. धन्यवाद.
Investment in securities market are subject to market risk. Read all the related documents carefully before investing.